Hello, insatiable listeners. Allie here. We are going to be turning the tables here in between season 4 and 5 for 3 weeks. We will return with new insatiable episodes on Wednesday, August 29th with season 5. And we're kicking it old school as it's back to school season. You'll find out what I mean by that then. In the meantime, I am going to be sharing with you some of my favorite interviews that I've recently done on other podcasts. You'll get quite a range of topics these 3 weeks, but that's how I roll, wide and deep. All of them will support you in your own epic health story. So enjoy. Also, if you haven't left an iTunes review, please consider doing it if the show has helped you. We are so close for my 100 review goal. This helps more people find the show. The more people find the show, the more we start changing the conversation away from dogma and into discovery. So thank you all who have. We've had some really wonderful reviews this lately. I'll read one that I really appreciated. Design Lover 757997 wrote, "Nuanced, smart, and sassy too. I'm exhausted of the constant unhealthy messages that barrage us everywhere from Instagram feeds. Seriously, those people with super round butts, they don't tell you it's implants, to our diet culture in general. Insatiable, my personal weapon of resistance against those messages. It's balanced, intelligent, and Allie, the host of the podcast, brings in some of the most interesting people I've heard in podcast interviews. Look, if you want to break free from rigid rules but still live a healthy and balanced life, Insatiable can help you carve out your own path. No rules, no dogma, just thoughtful new ways of seeing and being in the world. Thank you, Design Lover 757997. I'll be reading some more in our upcoming season. Also, one final health thing to keep in mind. My fall program, Why Am I Eating This Now, starts September 25th. If you are tired of being in the on-off eating cycle, if you're tired of fighting your body and yourself, and you think it's finally time to surrender and look into what this is all about, this is why I created this program for you. All the details are at allieshapiro.com/why am I eating this now. Sign up to my list and you'll get a bunch of great content that won't be shared here, but it will be shared for my list, so you can get a sense if the program is right for you. Also, I created this program so that people could really understand how different my approach is. And so if you were interested in the Truce with Food program that starts in January of 2019, if you take Why Am I Eating This Now, I created it so you can get the most value when you start Truce with Food. And we will credit the price of what you paid for Why Am I Eating This Now towards your Truce with Food tuition. So there's really no risk. And I created it so people can get a sense that you cannot fail this process. What I realized all these years is people don't not trust me. They don't trust themselves not to fail, not to crash and burn. And I created Why Am I Eating This Now? So it's a low risk, not an all or nothing extreme way for you to see and start to start the self-discovery process so that you can be the person who doesn't need to battle food, and we can strengthen you versus building up the battle with more food rules. So check that out. And I'll just leave you with this quote to inspire you, because guys and ladies, life is really short. I do not want you to waste any more time battling food, especially when there's so much liberation and inspiration on the other side of your food battle, if you take it as an invitation into self-discovery. But my client, Sarah S., who just completed Truce with Food and gave me permission to use her sentiment, told me that Truce with Food saved her life. That is no small feat, okay? And she started with Why Am I Eating This Now in the fall. So if you want to get on with your life in a new and liberating way, I hope you'll join us this fall. In the meantime, before we get back to new Insatiable episodes on Wednesday, August 29th, enjoy these 3 episodes where I was interviewed.
Hey, this is Heather Thorkelson, and you are listening to Republic of Freedom Radio, a podcast about getting better at being human. Our mission is to inspire you to harness the courage and confidence to live a more self-determined life. Okay, folks, today on Republic of Freedom Radio, I am really excited to welcome Ali Shapiro. We're going to have a conversation about everything that she is awesome at, and specifically around change and why it's so difficult to change. So here's her official bio so that we can learn a little bit more about her. Ali is the founder of Truce with Food, host of the top-ranked podcast Insatiable, a holistic nutritionist, integrated health coach, and a rebel with a serious cause. She created her Truce with Food method while in graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, where she earned her master's in organizational dynamics, which is like getting an MBA in the change process, where she drew from her decade plus of working with real-life clients and her own personal healing journey from having cancer as a teenager. Welcome, Ali.
Thanks for having me, Heather.
I'm so excited. So just so that the listeners know, this whole idea of having you on the podcast came from just scheduling a call to chat after noticing that there was a lot of synchronicities on Facebook, basically, between us.
We're like, we both think alike. Let's meet up and talk and agree.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk and agree and like learn cool things from each other, because I'm really fascinated by the work that you do. I mean, I know that the focus is around food, right? You have your Truce with Food. So it's around food, but there's so much more than that. It's so much more around one's ability to actually change. And as you said, just before we jumped on the actual recording for the podcast, there's a big difference between learning and change. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that we can open with that. And, when we typically think like we want to change, or, you're in the coaching field, I'm in the coaching field, we get these terms like mindset and you have to change your beliefs and mindsets, and they get interchanged as if they are the same things, or none of those concepts are clearly defined. So how I'm defining learning is often us reconfirming the mindset that we have. So for example, learning is, we're not really changing when we're learning. We're just learning more knowledge that's going to help us, but it's not really changing our worldview or the way that we see the world. So for example, you did a great episode I loved on like why the law of attraction is just like whatever, right? That is based on a meritocracy lens. And it's really big in the United States, right? Because that's a really big myth that we are taught in America. I don't know about Canada. I know in Europe, there's different degrees to that. But so people who have the mindset of, okay, meritocracy, which is mainly white privileged people, they have a belief in the law of attraction, which is basically confirming their mindset that life is a meritocracy, right? So it's like, you have to believe that you can manifest. You have to believe all that, but they're really just learning more of the same mindset that they were born into from a culture. But to actually change is to say, wait a second. When is meritocracy not true? Where are the blind spots to that? How am I really filtering all of the way that I look at things? In health, we look at meritocracy as if you work hard and you're disciplined, you will lose weight. If you pay attention to your nutrition, you're never going to get cancer, right? It's all these ideas that, and I should probably define meritocracy for people, but it's basically this concept that you earn things based on your individual merit and that you have control on it. And it completely ignores the systems and structures. So learning is like, oh, I'm just going to learn more to confirm that worldview that I have. Or if I believe that losing weight is about calories in, calories out, I'm going to read more articles about how to cut calories, how to resist food, focus on willpower, right? But to actually change in the domain with my clients is to like, wait a second. Let me actually understand my body and what works and be open to the information that actually contradicts calories in, calories out. We have so much emerging research, for example, that your gut biome determines how well you absorb food and all of this stuff. But if you have a belief in calories in, calories out, you're not going to be as open to that information because of the mindset you have. So learning is basically learning more about what we often unconsciously believe. We don't often know the mindset lens that we bring, but changing is actually shifting our mindset and really reorienting completely how we make meaning in the world. So a concrete example again, okay, oh my God, life isn't actually, if I'm trying to lose weight, it's actually not calories in, calories out, or trying to heal my body. It's not necessarily taking medicine. There's this whole other world out there of options. And I have to become my own best expert, which is a completely different mindset than being a passive recipient of, you tell me what to do. Right? Similar to in your work, the corporate world, which I used to be in, was everyone told me what to do. To becoming an entrepreneur, oh my God, I have to be self-directing. That is it's not just a couple belief change, it's an entire reorientation on the world.
Oh, absolutely. I love the way that you took us through that whole concept and ended it so beautifully right there in this area of entrepreneurship, which we both are, because we see this all the time in what's being sold en masse to people by the quote unquote gurus, right? We see that sort of, here is the answer. And then the recipients are like passive recipients. They're like, oh, so if I just get that funnel, then I'll be successful. Or if I just do this, then I'll be successful. They're waiting to just get, you know how it is, especially when people start out, right? They just take all the courses, capital, all capital, the capital courses, like, you know, learn as much as I possibly can. And then I'm just going to put this into practice and then the business is going to take off. And those of us who have been doing this for closing in on a decade or more, we're like, yeah, no. Because that's not how it works. You actually completely have to change who you are, how you choose which information to take on, which information to integrate. And similar to the whole diet thing and relationship of food to your body, you need to understand very clearly what works for you.
Yeah. Part of why my clients come to me is because I don't believe that there is one diet that works. I'm like, how can I know your body? How could someone else know your business? There's so much that goes into it. And I even in the adult development work that I incorporate, we call the first mindset the good girl mindset. And then the mindset we're growing into, the boss mindset. And I compare it to entrepreneurship because you have to take the same lens. Your body, you're basically learning your body, which is the startup, right? Oh my God, what works, what doesn't? Because for decades, I've just been reading magazines or listening to the doctor or believing everything. And I'm big on science, but science by definition is the continuing quest for knowledge. And so science is changing, right? What people believed 100 years ago is a lot of it is outdated. There's some continuing truths for sure, but you have to hold, okay, that this is proven and we're learning more and more and more at the same time. And so really to change in this day and age, especially when we're now being exposed, I think it's really exciting. We're being exposed to so many different ideas and so many different ways of being. And especially as women, we have more choices. Well, certain women of privilege and based on where you grew up and all that. It's a whole matrix, which is a whole other podcast. But women in the, Western world who come from middle class or above usually have more choices than ever. And I want us to take advantage of those rather than trying to recreate what I say the patriarchy with lipstick on, which is what a lot of these business models and gurus, they're selling the idea of ease and freedom, that it's so easy.
Yes.
And that's not, they found Dartmouth did a study and they found that 80% of entrepreneurs, they were trying to figure out, did they have extra risk-taking abilities or certain personality traits? And it was like, no, 80% of them had access to family money.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which then means you have access to a network. But for the 20% of us who don't, we can still make it if we're clear about the structures in place. And then we can learn how to learn around that and within that as well.
Yes, absolutely. So there's a couple things that came up for me while you were saying that. And one is that I have found over the course of my journey, and also just working with the dozens of different entrepreneurs that I have over the years, is that you go from this sort of initial state. And I think there's parallels between, let's say, entrepreneurship and people who are on a food or body journey, right? So you start off kind of going, well, okay, I just want someone to give me the answers. Like, what do I do? They come to the table. What do I do? And you go, well, it's not that easy. Then they start to learn, okay, I need to learn and I need to assimilate information in a different way. And that process is sort of the process of becoming discerning. And the process of becoming discerning, most people have to learn because school doesn't teach you that. Standardized schooling does not teach you to think outside of the box. It does not teach you to question things. I mean, some schools probably, hopefully, but a lot of it doesn't. A lot of standardized education is training you to be a worker. And so that process of becoming discerning, and also all that means in terms of letting go of old belief systems, breaking away from your regular social circles who are happy staying back there, not being discerning. It's a very uncomfortable process, and you've got to be really motivated to want that change. And so I'm curious, and this is something we touched upon on our last conversation that we had, like, can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what is it that happens in someone where they suddenly go, okay, the pain of change is now less than the pain of staying the same. I have to evolve, essentially.
Yeah. No, I love that question. And that's like one of my favorite words is discerning, because in my work with clients, it's always, we end up seeing how a lot of these quote unquote bad habits are actually protective. And clients have to realize, wow, I've been more defensive than I thought. And I'm like, yeah, we don't want to lose all the value of being protective and looking out for yourself, but we want to make you more discerning so you can be more accurate. And so I think the first thing is people have to know they have other choices, right? I know when I started out in the entrepreneurship world, I would pay attention to the people who would say that there were formulas, but I didn't jump, because I was like, I think those of us who know it has to be, many of us out there, I would say both in entrepreneurship and in the health field, they're like, wait a second, there has to be more to this. But we have to know that we have choices, right? And that's the first thing. And that was one of the questions that took me to graduate school as a cancer survivor. I had in my early 20s, I was diagnosed with IBS. I had been struggling with depression. I had my acne that I had tried antibiotics, all this stuff. Basically, because I was binge eating from unresolved trauma of cancer, I was only focused on dieting and like how to lose weight. And when I finally was able to heal myself by forgetting about dieting and focusing on discernment of like what's working for me or not only did I lose 15 pounds as a side effect of getting healthy, but I was like, this was so much easier. Why did I not know about this? Right. And so I think that for everyone, for listening or in general, people have to trust that there has to be a better way, that this can be done, first of all. So I want, if you have that yearning, trust it and keep following it, because I think anytime someone makes things too simple, I don't know. I just think that's kind of a warning flag of either privilege or not understanding the problem too deeply. So I think what would be helpful for me or for listeners is to lay out the adult development plateau continuum.
Yep.
Because I think the other part of this is, yes, the pain has to be great, but people have to feel like they have a safe container. They have to trust us that we can guide them in a way. I mean, I always tell my clients, I'm giving you a framework and a process, which is probably similar to how you work. Yep. I'm not going to give you the answers, because part of this, which is required for change, is for you to trust yourself, right? For you to keep going beyond our work together, you have to learn to trust yourself and know how to discern. And so I think it's really important, whether people are looking for support or in general, people have to feel safe that they can trust the process. And I found that if people do that, yes, they have to be in pain enough to want to change, but it's often just exhaustion. And then they're willing to say, hey, if you're going to give me this process. So I think what's helpful is to understand the adult development plateaus.
Yep.
So when you were talking about, I'm going to have to leave behind everyone who's kind of okay with just kind of going with the status quo. That's the first development, what I call the good girl mindset. But in the academic literature, and this is Robert Keegan and Susan Leahy's, both doctors out of Harvard's education school. So I've adapted it based on what I've seen over 10 years, but they call it the socialized mind. And before I get into this, I want to say there's pluses and minuses to each of these plateaus. So it's not like a better or worse. However, you have more and more freedom and more and more alignment the more that you continue up the adult development plateau. And to your point about public education, which I'm a product of, I don't know if you are, but yeah, it was designed to keep people in the socialized mind. And so the majority of people will never leave this mindset, whether they're college educated or not. And the socialized mind orients towards group harmony. Not necessarily group acceptance, but group harmony. And that is on a material plane, keeping up with the Joneses. That for me in the corporate world, I thought I was going to be happy because I was with a good corporate company, right? And doing good things, even though it was unfulfilling for me. And a lot of my clients are in corporate and love it, but for me, it wasn't. And you can be in corporate and not be in the socialized mindset. But these are kind of some general things. Following what the experts say are the good foods to eat, the bad foods to eat, right? Yeah. Or how to be, following formulas in entrepreneurship. This is how you're going to be successful, which their definition of success is usually least effort, most money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And when we're in the socialized mind, our whole goal is to maintain that group harmony. And that is often why we're stuck. It's not necessarily that we don't want to change. It's just that we think that's the path and that's going to make us fulfilled.
Yeah.
So that's the first plateau. And we also make different meaning in that, but I don't think that's going to necessarily be helpful for people. But we often rely on subtext and what we think we want. And there isn't a whole lot of self-examination going on because we're so focused on keeping the group happy and harmonious. Well, not even happy, harmonious. I would think of like in the corporate world, if you feel like, oh, we're doing something unethical, yet this is the objectives, right? The harmony is to keep going, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why we have whistleblowers, right? They're like, no more. Okay, so that's the one plateau. Then the second plateau, and this is where and I call that the good girl mindset, because I work predominantly with women. I mean, about 20% of my clients are men, and men are socialized in this as well. But women especially are conditioned to want to be wanted more than having their own wants and desires. And so I found with my clients, part of the process of changing is separating from what they really want versus what they've been conditioned to want. And men are this way as well. I just happen to work more with. It could be called the good dude mindset too, you know?
Yeah.
So then to get out of that, the next plateau is called self-authoring. And what's really interesting, just kind of from a percentage standpoint, and these are American statistics, but only about 33% of college educated Americans will get to self-authoring. They found in entrepreneurs that it's about 40%. And so again, this isn't necessarily if you've been college educated or not, it's are you willing to learn how to learn about yourself and life? And so at the self-authoring perspective, you have a discerning lens on the world. You're like, wait a second, these are the metrics that matter to me. Is it freedom? Is it making a difference? And how do I want to make a difference? Or is it, this is what's important to me? And you can still be very conventional and be self-authoring. I know in the medical field, I think that a lot of doctors are actually very self-authoring and you can have severe blind spots with your discernment filter, right? It's not.
Yep.
And so they often, especially doctors, Western medicine is amazing at acute issues like heart attacks, car accidents. And so if you are that type of doctor who's saving people in those, you have this discernment lens of how to do that. You don't really have incentive to figure out the blind spots of Western medicine, right? Because it's really working for you and your patients. Or if in entrepreneurship, if someone comes from a family of money and then they're telling people, look, you just have to pull yourself up and work really hard. And it's like, well, that did work for you because there were no structural barriers to people not buying, you know what I mean? So there's issues there. And when you're self-authoring, you really are focused on measuring metrics and data that are clear and that you're clear on what you're trying to measure. So for example, in entrepreneurship, one way that I got sidetracked in the beginning was I was worrying about my social media following because it seemed like that's what I should be doing. But really, social media, my clients are listening to my podcast. I have integrated physicians and that refer people to me, or like, I was getting, a lot of my clients were in publications, national publications, like the Philadelphia Inquirer and Prevention, because of their success. That was where things were coming. But I was so focused on what I thought I should be doing.
Right.
So I should also say, like, even though I'm very self-authoring, you can still have pockets of your life that are socialized. It's a continuing process. And so self-authoring is really about what do I want? And then using that to learn and to develop a discerning mindset from there. And then you start to develop a lens on the world. Like I said, one of the things, a meritocracy lens is something a lot of entrepreneurs, because they have pulled themselves up and made things happen, they think, okay, that's all that's involved, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, there's still other issues. And so the final plateau, and only about 1% of people ever get here. And I think as our world changes and we are being forced to change, I do think those numbers will increase. But the last plateau is called self-transforming. And that's where you can actually see the mindset that you're bringing. And I don't mean just like a belief here and there, but I mean like the entire lens that you're viewing the world from. And you can separate from it. And then you tend to surround yourself with people who think very differently from you, because you know that you cannot, the emotional meaning that you bring to things, you just can't, not that you can't comprehend, but like you need other people to almost like chime in, because that's just not your world.
Yeah.
And I can see that I'm on that cliff, because after the 2016 election, I saw that meritocracy lens. Even though I grew up in a progressive household, we knew that the system wasn't fair. There were still many places it was still hiding out, because in America, that's America's claim to fame, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's equal. We're all starting off. We all have a shot. And the election for me really, regardless of what you thought of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, symbolically, Hillary was a woman who worked hard, dotted all her I's, crossed all her T's, 40 years of experience, played the lean-in game, right?
Yep.
Did all of that, wore her pantsuits, tried to measure her speech. And then you have Trump, who was born on third base, fell back to first base a couple times, and is still surviving because of his privilege. And I was just like, wow, America is not really honest with itself. And as I've unraveled that lens, I've been able to see how much I saw that. Now, I would not say I'm self-transforming. I don't know all of my lens, but you really start to become open to other really different paradigms, not just different beliefs.
Yep. This is really great, meaty stuff. And I think it's wonderful for you to take us through these stages. You know, as you say, it's just one framework, but it's a really useful framework. And I think a lot of people can see themselves within that. And certainly, as you explained it all, I was like, yep, I know what that is. Yep, I know what that is. And like, I can tell you about times in my life where I existed at earlier stages, let's say, and then like felt the shift into the next stage, you know? And one of them being, and I think this is really important, whether we're talking about the type of clients you work with around food and body and everything, or the type of clients I work with in entrepreneurship, one of the things that is sort of the hardest leaps is learning who you are, which seems like a crazy thing. Like, I'm sure people are like, oh, I know who I am, duh, you know, but when I left the corporate world, I was 32. And I'm 39 now. So I was 31. Sorry, I was 31. I left the corporate world. And I thought I had a pretty good grasp on what made me happy, like what I liked, what I valued. You know, I've always been kind of an opinionated person, I studied political science in university. I'm really interested in world issues, whatever, and generally kind of a plugged in person. But when I left the corporate world, I realized that the way that I had been living had actually dulled my own sense of self. And so I really struggled. I spent a year not working. I got a package from my company and I was like, I'm not working because I don't know what the fuck I'm supposed to be doing. And I actually don't really know who I am. It's buried. It's somewhere deep down, you know, and I know what's valuable to me. I know I want to help people. I know I want to do this. I want to do that. But it was very kind of surface level stuff. And so I had blinders on and I thought I just have to sort of sit and be with myself for a while and go into some weird dark holes of my brain to actually figure out what's going on before I can move forward, because the next stage has to be something that's meaningful for me. It has to be a push towards the rest of my life, not just another job or another this or another that, right? Like, it can't just be a soother or a pacifier so that I can get into my comfort zone anymore. So I think that process, and I think it's sort of that process of becoming a discerning person, it's critical to start with knowing thyself and also recognizing that maybe you don't know yourself as well as you did because you've spent so much time being busy your whole life.
Yeah, I have so much to say about that, but I was curious, was that a nagging feeling that was growing in your 20s, or was it just something, because I think sometimes the idea is people think, oh, I'm going to wake up one day and it's going to be easy to make the choice to change. Was that something that different things gave you this, like, wait, there's a gap here between what I thought would fulfill me versus what's actually fulfilling me?
No, not really. I mean, I will say that because of my super weird upbringing, I had a general good sense of self-awareness from the beginning. When I decided to go into the corporate world, I knew I would hate it. I knew it was temporary. I knew, I had very specific objectives. I was like, okay, I'm going to pay off my student. I had no money. I came from an upper middle class family, but I got zero from them. I was out of the house by 17. I've been taking care of myself ever since. Zero zip nada. So I'm no Donald Trump, right? So
in many ways.
I lived in a garage for a long time. I drove a car that the front bumper was falling off. I've been in Shittsville, but I chose to go into a world that I knew was completely incongruent with who I was, because I really had to get financially stable. And then, there was also this opportunity, if I stayed long enough, if you stick with them for 5 years, then you can be sent abroad to do this global health fellowship. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. So I stuck around. I managed to get to year 3 without wanting to slit my wrists. And then those year 4 and 5, I was like, oh my God, I got overweight because I was drinking so much wine. I would come home at the end of the day and just drink, I was living in Toronto at the time. It was expensive. I made lots of money, but my life kind of sucked because my job was making me dead inside. And I was thinking I just have to I got to make enough money that I am not stressed about money anymore. And that I have no debt, and I got to get this global health fellowship because I'm not qualified to do something like that otherwise. I have to get that from this company before I ditch them, which I did. Luckily, I actually managed, which was amazing. I spent 6 months living in South Africa working with this phenomenal project that helps pregnant women who are HIV positive give birth to HIV negative babies. The program was actually saving babies' lives. So that was amazing. And when I came back from that fellowship, I was like, sayonara. Like I left the company. I'm like, I'm done. That's what I came here to do. I'm done. So I always knew that I would work for myself. I knew that the corporate world was temporary. But I became so dulled as a human being during those years because I was doing something that was so incongruent with who I was in my core. So I was medicating with food, with booze, with like travel all over the world. I was just kind of like pretending like that I didn't hate my life. And then when I got out, I was like, that's it. I'm out. I'm spending a year sitting in the park with my dog until I figure this shit out.
Well, I think that's a key. What you're saying is there were these habits that were incongruent with who you were. And I think for people listening to realize, talk about change and learning, people say, oh, 21 days to change a habit. I'm like, okay, that's if you're starting a new habit. But if you have something that is like sliding in and happening, that's like a symptom often that you're off. And I found in my work with clients, and I would say this was my boat as well. I never thought I would work for myself. I came from a very middle class family, and my parents were both urban school teachers, and everyone had were nurses and teachers, but there felt this incongruence over time. And then what I want to back up and say is, I think a lot of my clients and myself, we thought we knew ourselves, but we were more self-critical than self-aware. Because when you're in that socialized mind, what you're really knowing to do is how to control people's reactions. One element of that is, right, it can be the good worker that stays all night and sacrifices themselves, or the good mom that, and I'm putting good in quotes here, right? But you're taking these different definitions that society has given you that are frankly very unhealthy. In the States, we have a very unhealthy culture. Mothers are supposed to not have their own personhood and supposed to sacrifice for their children, or even though 100 years ago you had kids to work the farm, right? It's like, wow, how things have changed. The meaning of kids has changed. Now it's like, whatever. But I think we often confuse self-awareness and self-criticalness because we're so managing our image, and and again, I think most of my clients, similar to you, they would think of themselves as there's something in them that's rather rebellious or that doesn't want to be mainstream, which is what's so shocking. It's like, wait a second, I don't want to be thought of as like still caring about something that mainstream does, when mainstream is such a sick place to be. But belonging, that sense of belonging, of being a part of something, even if it's I joke that our community is a bunch of bad joiners because we're not dogmatic. We've been like burned by groups of women, especially, which is part of the healing path. But I think people have to have that awareness of like, hey, maybe I don't know myself. But unfortunately, what happens in our culture, at least, is like when you start having those quote unquote bad habits, which are actually, I think, protective of, I don't want to feel this emptiness. I don't want to feel this lack of meaning. People then give you a formula rather than telling you, let's explore this. They give you some sort of formula rather than saying, hey, this is a growth edge. Another point that you brought up that I think was, I'm going to say it in a different way, but what I heard you saying was this authenticity is an edge. We always hear, oh, be your authentic self. And it's like, that changes. And that's part of, I overlap growth mindset with these developmental things in the process of like thinking that you arrive at your authentic self is very fixed mindset. It's like, I'm either there or I'm not. And it's like, no, it's a continuing process and it changes. And that's why discernment is so important. So you can harmonize where you are in life based on what you've learned, how you're changing. And I don't know about you, but I felt like entrepreneurship, I feel like I've lived 1,000 lifetimes in 10 years. And I'm just not I'm not the same person, but I'm definitely more of who I think I was when I was little.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good way of putting that. It's so true. I think this process is one of the, like, I'm not a spiritual person, but I am going to say this, the process of entrepreneurship is such a journey of spiritual growth. Such a journey. There is nothing that is going to rake you over the coals and kick your ass quite like being an entrepreneur, because it makes you question everything. And it also makes you have to do hard things often, right? Like things that feel sort of existentially hard. They're not actually hard, but you're just like, like, oh my God, I have to do this. It's amazing what it does. But I agree with you that it actually brings you back. I mean, the people who survive it, not the ones who end up like quitting and going back to a job, but the people who become long-term entrepreneurs, I think we do get back to our original selves much more than the average person. We're much more in tune with the things that make us happy, with where our true strengths and weaknesses are. You got to get really, really honest with yourself.
Well, oh my God, you just said so many things, but yeah. Well, what's funny is when I was in third grade, I remember getting a slip. My parents were teachers, so they were really, my sister jokes that if we ended up in jail, my parents would be like, what did you learn? But they were really, They were really vigilant about being, kind to teachers. And I got this pink slip home in third grade for talking without raising my hand. And looking back, probably all the boys were being called on. So I was frustrated. So I started a quote unquote underground newspaper, which just meant the teachers didn't know about it. But I had like an Apple IIe computer. And I started with my best friend at the time. Her name was Andrea. And we had a Dear A&A column. And when people would write in their, and then I created like word puzzles. And I'm like, holy shit, my Insatiable podcast is the same underground podcast, just it's like a different format, and it's definitely not word puzzles or whatever. But I also want to point out, because a lot of my clients are in leadership roles in their company. And what I've found is that you can still be entrepreneurial in those leadership roles. And actually, sometimes it's even harder because you have to convince the status quo, right? Like we don't have to convince the status quo. And I found that when you become self-authoring, I see so many of my clients, their leadership style changes, and they are and they're working to change the structures in their corporate cultures, which is also needed. And so I think that's really important as well, to say that like you could be in any work environment, but it's about being self-led, right? By who we are at our core and unlearning everything. And the other thing I wanted to say that you said about strength, you have to know your strengths and weaknesses. And this is a big part of change, is that it's important to focus on your strengths, and all of the change of like positive psychology, motivational interviewing, all of that is focused on your strengths. However, there's a shadow side to our strengths, which is our weaknesses. And I think that those are just as important, because when we get to that self-authoring or discerning point, if we're only focusing, you can only go as far as you know your blind spots and weaknesses, which is what entrepreneurship exposes you to every day. And so I'm glad you brought that up. And I wanted to just expand upon that in terms of change. You can't just focus on your strengths. Life is not all puppies and rainbows, people. Whether you're in entrepreneurship, the corporate world, or raising children, it's hard, and that's okay. Like with the right amount of support and grit, it's creative tension. And that's ultimately what helps us become discerning and go out in the world and experiment. And I think that gets lost in our culture a lot. It's like, oh, we just want to focus on the positive, or in entrepreneurship, they're like, outsource things that you shouldn't be doing. That is true. You also need a budget for that. But you also can't just think that like anytime someone says something to you that is feedback that you don't want to hear, it's about the other person. Right? I mean, sometimes you have to know if your offer flops, it's not, or you can't charge what you're worth. You have to charge what the market cares about. It's like all these things that I think in very, very traditional entrepreneurship claims are, I don't know. Thank God there's other options like you out there.
Well, exactly. And it's, again, like that's part of kind of being discerning, right? You've got to look past, because the majority of the external feedback or the external input that we get is very much focused on the positive. It's like rah, 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 as you say, like outsource the stuff you're not good at, whatever. But oh my God, it's so much more nuanced than that. Like it is so much more nuanced than that, including when it comes to things like diet. I mean, even just myself, I've been trying to retrain myself to focus on certain types of food. I'm really trying to get away from foods that have like added sugar in them, right? Like I just wasn't aware of how much sugar there is in shit that, like, there's fucking sugar in bran flakes. Like maybe I'm dumb. Maybe everybody knows this, but I'm like, bran flakes taste like cardboard. How can there be sugar in there? And this is just a thing I was doing last week, which is why I'm talking about it now. But, I'm trying to like teach myself more. I'm trying to learn about the foods that I'm putting in my body so I can make better choices, right? And it would be so easy for me to live in that zone of just like, oh, but no, this is a good food. There can't be sugar in that, and not actually like make an attempt to be discerning and go, well, maybe I don't know.
One thing I would say though, that the beauty of if you really work to change and to change your mindset. And again, this is one framework of adult development, but once you become discerning as a business owner, it's easier then to be more open to let me figure out what I need for my body. And it sets you on this path of no longer looking for the experts, but really getting so that you don't waste your time. Because if you think about what I said in the beginning, like I find that people are willing to change if they trust you, but also the change process is messy and hard. And so if we have to drag it out, that's often why we don't make it to the other side. I'm very persistent, but the shadow side of that is being stubborn. And that's why it took me fucking 13 years to figure this out. I mean, there was no model or map, but it was like, it's amazing that I lasted this long because I had to go in so many different places. And so now that I'm discerning and I know that no one's going to give me the answers to anything, including Western medicine, my whole life is easier. And it just accumulates and you get more and more discerning rather than more and more believing in the cultural myths, which at least in America are
very unhealthy, very pervasive, and very strong. And you reminded me of what I was trying to get at, which is these blind spots that we have. When you get to that stage where you start being really aware of your blind spots and you start going, well, maybe that's a blind spot and maybe this isn't, like, I've just been taking this for granted and I'm going to go and dig around over there like a little gopher and like figure out what's what. Like, it's really incredibly empowering. And I love what you said about once you kind of get to that level as an entrepreneur, it bleeds over into other areas of your life, because it really does. It fundamentally changes who you are. And in that way, like you said, you go back to being a kid, because a kid is like, parent says like, do this. And you're like, I don't like that. They know. Like, they know. Yeah. Why? They're like, I don't like to do that. That's not fun. I'm not going to do that. And you're like, holy shit, you pain in the ass. But but like, we don't do that as adults because we have all this stuff piled on top of us about what we're supposed to do and what's the right thing to do and social norms and blah, 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 whatever, right? Not that I'm saying everyone should behave like a 5-year-old, but you become...
We already are, though, right? Yeah. Everyone's wounded 5 or 6-year-olds that they don't know, and they're just in adult bodies. So why not have the joy and wonder back, right?
So true, right? But so there's that piece of finding your blind spots and taking yourself down that journey of like, I need to continue to learn about this and I need to learn about that. And I need to learn I need to know what I don't know. You know, I need to learn what I don't know. And like all these, like, I know it sounds like I'm being crazy, but you're nodding in agreement. Like this, at some point you just get that.
Right. Well, because I think about, again, in my 20s, I wanted everyone to tell me what to do, especially with dieting, my health. And now if I ever hire someone, I'm like, my challenge is I don't know what I don't know. It's not what I know, it's what I don't know. And I think so as you become more discerning, you're comfortable saying you have blind spots because you know that there's value in exploring that. Whereas often when you're in a socialized mind, especially in traditional, I had one client who's like, oh, growth mindset. And she was right. She was like, growth mindset sounds all good in theory, but you're not allowed to fail in my work environment. People say they glorify that, but you're not allowed to fail. And so everyone is dealing with different work environments or different families or different relationships. But I think oftentimes we are attracted to the very systems that, based on where we are, that don't encourage us to look at our blind spots. And there are stakes that, so I don't want to say it's like, oh, it's just super easy. However, it's often much more easy than people think. So I
hear you completely. It really depends on the context. It depends on so many things in your own little ecosystem, right? Like everyone has their own ecosystem. And the last time we talked, when we were just having a casual conversation, you asked me about how I avoid being influenced and stuff by sort of the larger narrative. And I was like, well, I'm a super introvert, first of all. And like, I don't pay attention to most of what's on the internet because I think it's garbage. I'm not interested in what everyone else is peddling because it's mostly fluff and garbage and it's not true. And I know that based on my own experience. So that's super helpful. So for any introverts who are listening, that is one of your superpowers, especially if you're an introvert entrepreneur. Oh my God, it's amazing. Hold on to that. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that on top of discernment becoming easier, when you nail it in one area of your life, it spills over into other areas. Also, and I think this is so critical, the process of tackling something that feels hard also becomes easier because you realize that it's a myth. It's a myth. Like I literally today, Ali, I sat down and I looked at my to-do list. One of the things I was like, like I would rather stick hot pokers in my eyes, but I know that I know
your expressions are amazing.
But like, I know that feeling is total horseshit. There's no validity to it because as an entrepreneur, so much of what you're doing when you're not busy delivering your service, like teaching your course or working with your clients, I would say a good 70 to 80% of the rest of your time is figuring things out. You're figuring out like, how do I do this? How do I do that? What's the next thing here? What's the plan? What's my, like you're finding answers to questions. You're figuring out like what software you're going to use for the next thing that you're delivering or whatever. You're really constantly looking for answers. So these things that feel hard, they're only hard when I'm looking at them. But the minute I start to do them, they're not so hard. And it's kind of like running. I liken it to running. When I think about going for a run, I want to slit my wrists. But as soon as I have my shoes on and I'm out running, I'm like, oh, this feels really good. And then when I'm done my run, I'm like, I am the champion of the universe, But then the next day when I'm thinking about going for a run, I'm like, oh, that sounds like an absolutely terrible idea. It's that feeling of understanding the things that we have all this resistance to. The resistance is mostly a lie because as soon as you step into the thing, as soon as you start taking action, it just kind of becomes easier. And then guess what? It's done. 30 minutes later, it's done. and you did that thing. And when you start doing that again in one area of your life, whether it's entrepreneurship or it's a relationship with food or whatever, it becomes easier in other areas. It never goes away, kind of like fear. It never goes away. It's always right there. But you as a human being are able to go, that's bullshit. I'm not listening to your voice. And you just do it anyways.
Exactly. Well, what you're talking about is you actually know the value of change and overriding resistance. And I think that's, yes, change is hard. But again, I think so many of us have confused learning and change that we're like, oh my God, change isn't as hard as you often think it is. But you've learned, when you're only learning, to me, you're only getting incremental improvements. And I love learning. I mean, I'm considering go back for a PhD. Like my husband has 2 master's degrees. We are like education junkies, right? But I remember writing my master's thesis and it was like struggling with it so hard. And Carlos, who's my husband, was like, Allie, if you weren't struggling, if you don't come out of this thinking differently and feeling differently about the world, then why did you pay all this money, like of your own hard money to go? And I was like, oh, you're right. But it makes it, but I think, so I just emphasize that because often we're learning the same thing and we're staying in the same paradigm and we're not getting the increasing freedom and the increasing simplicity. When you like or know what you want and know what's good for you, life becomes so much more simpler. To your point, you can block out that which is not relevant. But yeah, I think, and what I think I see with my clients is what's interesting is about 80% of my clients have a career shift after our work together, because we do focus on the emotional reasons that people turn to food, which are their stubborn habits, which require a change process, not learning more tips to resist food, like don't go to a party hungry or meditate and ask yourself if it's worth it. It's like, that's not the issue. You need a change process here. But they find that, and I always say health isn't what your diagnosis is, what you wear, whatever. It's like, are you alive? Are you letting that creative impulse that is in nature, that is in us, is that flowing or is that blocked? And they find that they want to take greater and greater risks. And that same feeling, to your point, the feeling of change doesn't go away, but they have gotten more resilient. It's almost like the mountain hasn't changed in size, but they keep getting taller and taller and taller. And then you just want to scale bigger and bigger mountains. So it's all proportion to your courage and your resilience, but it becomes addicting in a way, and not in like a frantic way. I think sometimes people are pivoting and changing and there's a franticness because they're actually avoiding change, or they're trying to stay in their same paradigm. I see that in the coaching industry a lot, people addicted to transformation. And I'm like, okay, but if you're somewhat content, do you want everything to change? I don't know. That's a question I have. I don't know. I'm curious what you would think. But you want to push your edge, and you get that resilience. It's like running, lifting weights, muscles atrophy. You've got to keep doing it to get greater and greater results and see how far you can go. And that's what I love about, at least the way that I structure Truths with Food, which incorporates this, is that we don't change that you're not going to have doubts. We can't stop the fact that you're going to feel lonely, that you're going to feel uncertain, that you're going to feel tired. We're changing what those feelings mean, though. So rather than stop, it means let me explore. It doesn't mean just plow through it, but let me get the discernment. Let me get the data I need. Let me really understand what's safe, what's not safe here. Because for me, safe food issues often come back to safety in terms of emotional risks and physical. So that's the lens that I look at it through. But in entrepreneurship, it's, the investments of time, money, resources, public failure, those kind of things. So yeah, I think that's what frustrates me is change gets a bad rap.
Change gets a really bad rap. And yet the only thing that's really guaranteed is change.
And we're living in a time where it's like, if you can learn how to learn, everything's fucking broken. So if you like, because change helps you become more creative. And I think people think creative means like you're going to draw or sing, and that too. But I mean, a creative way of looking at the world. Why are we looking at this way? Like, I was like, why are we looking at food as calories when there's so much richer meaning if we look at it as medicine? And then why are we looking at willpower? And why aren't we looking at these behaviors as protective rather than about willpower or discipline? And so like you can look at things from different angles and come up with really great solutions, because normal is not working.
Oh my God. Normal is not working. The dominant cultural narrative is not working. Look at the state of affairs. I mean, if we're talking specifically about the US as well, look at the state of affairs in the US, just with people's general well-being. I mean, oh my God, obesity rates, everything.
I know. But part of the challenge is America has a culture narrative. So not everyone believes this. I never have, but that America's number one, right? That is part of a mindset of Americans, which is part of white supremacy, part of patriarchy, all these sub-nesting dolls. But what people would relate to is, oh, America's number one. And so I tell my clients, get your news from outside the US. This is not a healthy place to have news, at least. I mean, but it's like when you start reading, I mean, it's amazing. I remember I think it was Europe, they covered, how Monsanto had been covering up about Roundup causing cancer. And it was like crickets here in the US because
there's a big lobby,
because of and our media is, whether you're CNN, MSNBC, Fox is state propaganda at this point, even like the New York Times, all these things are all owned by these big companies. And so, and let me tell you here, big ag and big food and big pharma own both sides of the aisle. So it's this illusion of separation.
It's so true.
That's a whole other time. But you become more discerning and you become comfortable being that independent voice, I think. I've felt kind of politically homeless because I'm definitely not a far right person and I tend to be progressive, but I don't agree with all the things that my quote unquote liberal friends believe. And so I'm like, I need someone who can like talk about these ideas. And I don't have all the answers. I have more questions, but that's kind of a rabbit hole. But my point is that it can often be lonely though at the same time. And so you do have to find people who are in this, like, let's really look at what's true. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we're all working towards. And what's healthy, both in entrepreneurship and our bodies, is what's the truth here that unites everything. And so that I can feel holistically whole, which is how we felt as kids before we got wounded and had to wear these masks and armors and ways of seeing the world.
That is such a beautiful way to round up such an interesting conversation, I gotta say. When you said, I don't have the answers, I just have a lot of questions, I think that's the beauty of it. I think we should be aiming actually for that, not to have the answers. The problem is that everyone's telling us they have the answer and it's bullshit. What we need is more people who are okay sitting with the questions. And I will say as well that the one really beautiful thing about the world that you and I exist in, this online world, is that we can come together. We can find like-minded people and create virtual communities. We're not stuck with just living in like small town Canada, like where I grew up, and you only have like the 5 people your age in town to talk to. Thank God we don't live in the 70s.
I know. When I would say, having lived in big cities, there's bubble. I mean, I was in a bubble before the election. Like, I was like, damn, I thought I was so diverse. And I was like, no, even though it was racially diverse, I was like, wow, we're all middle class or above, and living in a city, there's bubbles everywhere.
Absolutely. And so living in that place of questioning, living in that place of knowing that even though you maybe now don't feel like you live in a bubble, maybe you still are maybe you're in a different bubble. And that's, I think, a really key piece, right? The whole point here is we're talking about change and what that means and what that looks like and what are the stages of change, but also getting really comfortable with living in the uncertainty, living within the question, and that question never fully going away. There is a peaceful existence to be had in there that feels safe and doesn't feel like, oh my God, I don't know anything. And like, there's a comfortable space living in the questions is what I'm trying to say. And I say that just on my own personal experience because I feel like I live there and I'm okay with it. Life goes on.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is by Rainer Maria Rilke, who, he says, I beg you, dear son, not to, to live the questions so that one day maybe you'll live into the answers. He talked about the questions being like library books, and rather than just go read, like live into the questions so that you can, because you're not ready for the answer yet. And I just love that. And I know in my entrepreneurship journey, the questions have taken me much longer to answer than I ever wanted, but they led me in the most interesting places because I did go in open-minded.
That's amazing. And also you are amazing for quoting Rilke because I love him so much. And like, there are very few people I know that just like drop Rilke quotes. You just went way up in like the notches of cool.
Well, my degree, if I were to go back for 6 more classes, I'd also have a master's in philosophy. And so I love that because these big questions are always, I was asking people for a while on my podcast, I'm like, what do you think happens after we die? I was just like, because it shows you people's worldview. So that's what I realized is if you know how people think what happens after you die, you can tell a lot about how they live.
Such a good
paradox
point.
there.
Oh my goodness. I love that. Cool. Okay. All right. We could talk forever. So I'm going to wrap this up with you, but thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And where can people find you and what's next for you?
Yeah. So people can find me. If you're interested in going a little deeper into self-awareness, I would definitely check out my What's Your Comfort Eating Style on my homepage, which is alishapiro.com. It's basically, what do your eating patterns say about you? So if you're over drinking like Heather was in the corporate world, which many of my clients do, or overeating, you'll start to learn your stress patterns there. But what's next for me is I'm actually going to be starting a community for people who have engaged with my work. And it's going to be more like a think tank so that we can start, because basically none of the frameworks for wellness exist exist. There's not a formula. And so I want us to start figuring it out together, this new frontier. I'm working on a book proposal, and then I'm going to be licensing Truths with Food to other practitioners, because a lot of my clients are in traditional medicine, or they're coaches themselves, and they found it to be the most effective thing they've done because we're actually changing people's mindsets. And so I'll be licensing that in 2019.
Amazing.
So that's what I've got.
Wow, congratulations. And please, everybody, run down to alishapiro.com and just check her out. She's awesome, even if you don't have issues with food. And also Insatiable, right? People should look you up on iTunes or...
Thank you. Yeah, I forgot. I always forget. That's my favorite place for people to start is, Insatiable. It's a very holistic health podcast. So we talk about stuff like change, emotional health, we range, and it's non-dogmatic. So you're not going to hear, we did a pros and cons of Whole30, but you're not going to hear all the reasons to be vegan or all the reasons to be paleo. You're going to hear here's how you figure it out for yourself.
Oh, I love it. Okay, I'm definitely going to start downloading more episodes to my... I almost said Walkman. Oh my God. You can tell I was raised in the 80s. Down to my iPhone, not my Walkman phone. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much again, Ali. This has been great, and I hope we get to have you on the podcast again sometime.
Thank you, Heather.
That's it for another episode of Republic of Freedom Radio. For more inspiration, head over to republicoffreedom.com. And if you want to connect with me, your host, around growing a profitable business you love, you can find me at heatherthorkelson.com. Go forth and be free, my friends.